feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home, when Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He, and His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Let not your heart be troubled. This tender word I hear, resting on His goodness, I lose my doubts and my fears. And though by the path He leadeth, one step I may see, that His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. And I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I am free, for His and I know He watches me. What a friend we have in Jesus. Whenever I am tempted, whenever clouds arise, when song gives way to sighing, and when hope within me dies, I draw thee closer to Him, and from care He sets me free, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I know, for His word has told me. Amen. Amen.
So let's look at the opening text, the first two verses of Psalm 32. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. And verse 2, blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. Let's look at that together on the screen and fix it in our mind. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity. Iniquity is sin. To impute means to put it on your record, your accounting. Blessed is a man to whom the Lord does not list his sins on his record. And a second part, in whose spirit, that means in your heart, there is no deceit. If you want to be blessed, you need to have your sinful acts wiped off your record. And you need to have the Lord deal with the nature of your heart. that caused you to sin in the beginning. The title I've chosen is Surrounded. Now, many of David's psalms, perhaps a majority, he is surrounded by his enemies. He is surrounded by sin and sinners. He is asking the Lord to relieve him of the consequences of the sin that surrounds him, that afflicts him, that on many occasions hounds him and chases him, and as we preached on last week, causes him even to hide in a cave. Surrounded by sin. Well, what do you do if you're surrounded by sin? Well, we need to know this because we too are born sinners in a sinful, fallen world, and we too are surrounded by the consequences of sin every day. We see it on the news, we see it in society, and we experience the consequences personally on most days of our lives. Well, what do? My first thought when I chose this title, because the word surrounded is in this psalm several times, my first thought went back to my childhood experience watching Westerns. Anybody else watch Western programs, old movies, black and white? Yeah. And I started to think back on Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, Sky King. I thought back to Gunsmoke and Have Gun, Will Travel. I think that was my favorite one. and Branded and Rawhide and all of those programs. Well, what did they do when they got trapped by the enemy? Well, generally they would try to effect a daring escape. I remember one episode when they found a trap door and they got down under the house and hid in the basement in the trap door in this little pit someone had dug, and the enemy burned the house down and went their way thinking they'd destroyed them. And then opens that door through the smoldering wood and they come out free. I think of another time when they were trapped on the edge of a cliff by the enemy. And there was no way out, and they turned and looked down, and it was hundreds of feet, and there was a little river down there. And one of them said to the other, "Can you swim?" He said, "No, me neither." And they jumped, landed in the river, somehow made an escape. Other times, they would decide they just have to go out in a blaze of glory and shoot their way out. Sometimes they would, sometimes they'd die, usually in slow motion at the end of the program. But my favorite episodes were when the soldiers would arrive just in the nick of time on horseback. The cavalry would ride in. And the enemy would be arrested or killed or run off, and the innocent would be saved by the cavalry. Now, I have to confess something to you. When I was young, I had trouble with words. Well, let me restate that sentence. I've always had trouble with words. And, in school for years, I thought, and I don't want Brother Law to hear this, I was his history teacher, but I thought that the South lost the Civil War. And I didn't know why we were fighting over silver anyway. I'd rather have gold. And at church for years, I sang with all my heart, bringing in the sheep, bringing in the sheep. They shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheep. Well, that technically is right, but I didn't know what a sheave was. When somebody corrected me, I said, "Really, what's that?" Well, I also for years could not distinguish between cavalry and Calvary. And I would say such things as, Jesus died on a cross on Calvary. Right? I didn't mean any disrespect. I just got very confused. Or I would say something like, somebody would say, "They're not going to be rescued." And I said, "Yes, they would. Calvary will be here any minute. Here comes the Calvary." Well, think about this point, though. How do we get rescued from a sinful, fallen world? It's because of Calvary. So maybe I wasn't that far off in that one.